Today, we're looking at a brown ink by Papier Plume Sepia. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. Down below, there's timestamps so that if there's only certain things you're interested, you can skip around to it. But if you've got the time, I would appreciate you checking out the entire video. You can also follow me over on Instagram. And if you like fountain pen ink reviews and are new here, I would invite you to subscribe. In order to make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I then inked up the Fountain Pen Revolution Himalaya with a flex nib, wrote with it for a day, and then used it to take the notes for this video. In order to have some standardization while looking at writing samples, I always use Clairfontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper, although there are additional writing samples that occur much later in the video. Now, let's look at the writing sample. I picked this ink up in sample form, so it comes in a vial like this. And to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's take a look at the Clairfontaine. We get no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 is no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shading. Now the extra fine is about the same tone as the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, and some very nice shading going on. Look at the Q and the K in quick, the X in fox, the bottom of the P and the S in jumps. Very nice. 8 seconds to dry. Medium is about the same tone as the extra fine, with no feather spread, halo sheen, some very nice shading. Look at how brown is light and fox is dark. Nice. Dog goes from lighter to darker. 13 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both shows plenty of color variation, and we do get it in the writing. Tomoe River. No bleeding, normal Tomoe River ghosting. The 1.1 is no feather spread, halo sheen. It has some shade spots, like the E, the A, the dot in the I, spots of it, not a ton of it. The extra fine is about the same tone, slightly just a hair lighter than the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, and some very nice shading, some darker spots peppered throughout the writing all over it. 9 seconds to dry. Medium is the same tone as the extra fine, with no feather spread, halo sheen, and it does have that peppering of shading throughout where you get these spots all over that are just a bit darker than what's around them. And 16 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby for both show plenty of color variation, and that's where we're seeing the peppering of color in the writing. Rhodia. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 is no feather spread, halo sheen. It has the peppering of color throughout. Now the extra fine is just a hair lighter than the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen. Peppering of color, again, very nice, and 6 seconds to dry. Medium is the same tone as the extra fine, with no feather spread, halo sheen, and peppering of color once again. 8 seconds to dry. Scrubby for both show plenty of color variation, and that's the peppering of color that we're seeing. I agree with Vita. I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down and immediately put it into water for 10 to 15 seconds. And we see this gray line at the bottom that immediately got into the paper, showing some permanence, and then this brown, it's a very light brown that's pushing its way up. I'm just going to leave it as a very light brown. The one on the right I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water. Now that brown really stayed at the bottom, so did the gray, and only a little bit of the brown continued to move up. Very little, meaning I'm expecting a little bit of hold on here. Resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it might be to clean from your pen. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, I expected better results. I'm looking at the lowercase h. The right side got a little blown out, but it is still completely readable, which means it could be safe to use in a note-taking situation if you want to highlight. Now, water is not completely removing it. It is reactivating and lifting the darkest parts of the ink, but not that grayish brown that we saw on the bottom. Pen Flush is doing everything that water did, a little bit more. We're starting to see on the bottom of edge some of the paper come through. Pen Flush is what I had to use to get this out of my pen. I did not need to use a 1/3 bleach solution, which we do see would completely remove it from the paper.
although here we see a little bit of a yellow staining still left behind.
I test viscosity or flow with a tilt test that I'll link down below in a description or in a card. Now for the inks I've tested, I have found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9.
Papier Plume Sepia has a viscosity of 2.43, making it normal.
For the inks I've tested, I have found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. I find this by using my writing samples that were done on Clairfontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper.
Papier Plume Sepia has an average dry time of 10 seconds, making this a faster drying ink. Instead of finding inks that look like Papier Plume Sepia, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. I wanted a nice green and chose Diamine Evergreen.
The second writing sample is done on TWSBI, Leuchtturm 1917, and 20-pound copy paper.
Here we're looking at TWSBI notebook paper. Now we get no bleeding, very minor ghosting. The 1.1 is no feather spread, halo sheen. It has a couple little spots of that peppering of shading going on that we had before. The extra fine is slightly lighter than the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, the peppering of shading throughout like we saw in the other writing samples, and 5 seconds to dry. Medium is about the same tone as the extra fine, with no feather spread, halo sheen, and yes, peppering of shading for 8 seconds to dry. Scrubby for both shows plenty of color variation, and we are getting it. Leuchtturm 1917. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 is no feather spread, halo sheen. It does have some peppering of shading going on. It's not too bad, not as much as we got with other papers. The extra fine is just a little bit lighter than a stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, same peppering of shading that we get in the stub, little less than the other papers, 4 seconds to dry. Medium is slightly darker than the extra fine, just a little bit lighter than the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, some very nice peppering of color. This looks the best of the three of them. 6 seconds to dry. Scrubby for both, does show good color variation, and that is the peppering that we're getting. What about 20-pound copy paper? Well, we get a lot of bleeding, we get a lot of ghosting. You can't use the page underneath, or you can't use the back of the page, but it doesn't touch the page underneath. The medium has feathering, has some spread, has no halo, no sheen, and no shade. Extra fine is the same tone as the medium. It does have feathering, it does have spread, it has no halo, no sheen, and no shade. All of the feathering on both of these is very tiny, just there. But I don't think that's a big issue when you're talking about the 20-pound copy paper. 1 second to dry. Scrubby does show color variation, we just don't get it in the writing, and that is all that I have for the writing sample.
So what do I think of Papier Plume Sepia? It's a very nice brown, and it gives decent shading. The tone of the ink feels a little off to me. Sepia being one of my favorite brown tones, it doesn't quite feel like it, but that's a name when it comes to browns that does have a wide range that can apply to it. This one's just not the sepia for me, but as a brown, it's pretty good. So what nib and pen is going to give the best writing experience? I was using a medium flow. So what nib and pen is going to give the best writing experience? I was using a medium flow broad pen writing out in public that got people stopping on the street looking at what I was writing because of the amazing color that was going down. So that's what I would use here. I'm going to remind you that I'm here every day with a new ink review. Thanks for watching.